My name is Kimberly Kay, and I'm the Operations and Editorial Director with the Legal Insurrection Foundation. We're really excited to bring you this presentation tonight, where we will be talking about discrimination by artificial intelligence, and the ways that we believe that is being used and what we think that might bring in our future. So I know it's a discussion we probably haven't heard much about. It's something we're just now starting to learn about, and I think it will be very useful and informative moving forward. But before we jump into that, I just want to go over a handful of housekeeping things. So I will be your host this evening, and I will be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A. So we'll have some discussion. I know Professor Jacobson and Mr. Baker have some remarks prepared and just some thoughts that they'd like to share. We'll have a bit of discussion, and then I will move to participant questions. So just to keep it simple, if you have anything that you want to say, just, if you want to communicate with others who are on the online event, please do so in the chat section. If you have questions that you're posing to the panelists, please do that in the Q&A section, and I'll be monitoring both. We do ask that you just keep your questions on topic, be civil. We've never had an issue. I guess it's just the mother in me. I feel compelled to say, be nice. Please try to get along with everyone so we can all have a good time and we can all learn a lot tonight. So this programming is free. Everything we do is free. We run a very, very, very tight ship and a very lean organization because we take donor dollars very seriously, and we put that money right back into being able to produce quality programming like this and offer it to you free of charge. So if you have donated, we want to thank you. If you feel compelled to donate, I will drop the link in the chat section to make it very easy. We accept all forms of payment, however you would like to do that. And if not, we're just glad you're here. And we hope that you take this information and you learn something from it and you share it with other people and that it becomes useful for you. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Professor Jacobson, who is the founder of Legal Insurrection and the Legal Insurrection blog. And let's go ahead and get this started.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you particularly Stuart for being here and participating with us. I've learned a lot from him already, and hopefully he'll impart some of that to you. He's written a couple of great articles on this topic, and I met him 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, and that's really what sparked my interest in many ways in this topic. So the topic tonight is at one level not new, and another level it's new. It's the fight we've been having and was recently resolved by the Supreme Court over equality versus equity, equal protection versus equity, which is not equal protection, which is treating people differently based on race and other characteristics. The Supreme Court dealt with the issue of race. And the Supreme Court in Students for Fair Admissions really resolved the issue. Equity is not a thing in law anymore, not the way that the progressive movement uses it, I should say. Equity as a separate legal concept still is, but equity in terms of equal results or manufacturing results based on race and by implication other factors is not accepted anymore. Complete rejection of that by the US Supreme Court. Nothing new. That's always been the law for recent memory, at least for many decades. But if anybody had any doubts, and I think some lower court judges might have had doubts, there's no doubt left anymore. Equal protection is the value we're supposed to bring to the law, to university admissions. And that case, while it dealt with university admissions, has huge implications for the corporate world, certainly for government, for other statutes that deal with anti-discrimination. So it's not just limited. And there will be court fights and there will be other fights over that. And certainly at the Equal Protection Project, that's something we're dealing with pretty much daily. Kimberly and I wrote an op-ed that was published on Fox News Digital, which is their website. And we talked about how the Supreme Court ruling we already saw the signs in the many months leading up to it, when people knew what the result was going to be. There were many actions taken to evade it. One is the elimination of statistics. Remember, the Asian students, and particularly the Harvard case, their strongest and most powerful piece of evidence were the SAT comparisons as to what you needed to get in, depending who you were. They're also going to offload it to others. They will have others, private foundations who will work with government, who will work with various entities, and have them do the discrimination. That's not really a legal defense, but that's something we've seen increasingly. They will disperse some of this stuff throughout universities. So the DEI programming that was highly questionable, they will disperse elsewhere within the university, even if they eliminate the DEI department. They will play word games meant to hide racial discrimination. So they will talk about things like marginalized people. We favor marginalized or historically underrepresented people. Those are all just word games for race and to some extent ethnicity. And the last thing we listed was algorithms and artificial intelligence would be another way that this would be evaded. And that's really the purpose tonight. I think, like most people, really don't have necessarily a deep understanding of the mechanics behind it. I throw around terms like algorithms and machine learning and artificial intelligence almost interchangeably, but I've done a lot of reading, particularly in the last month or two, and there are key distinctions, and hopefully I'm not going to mangle them if there are technologically literate people watching this. So these are not my definitions, but I think it will become important as we get deeper into this topic that algorithms are any form of automated instruction. It can be as simple as a single process that gets executed when you hit a certain button. The machine has been programmed with an algorithm to tell it what to do when you hit a certain key on your computer. There's machine learning, which is the definitions I've seen are machine learning is a set of algorithms that is fed with structured data in order to complete a task without being programmed to do it. Credit card fraud detection algorithm is a good example of machine learning. So the credit card companies have programmed their computers that if somebody has a charge in Pakistan, but they live in the US and they've never done a charge abroad before, those series of things, aha, that's a red flag. They send you a text message saying, is this a legitimate charge? And then there's artificial intelligence, which is the hot button phrase, which is, again, I'm relying on others for these definitions, is a set of algorithms that is able to cope with unforeseen circumstances. When I think of artificial intelligence, I always think of HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey, somebody who gets angry at you and decides to take over the world. But it's not quite that. That might happen, but it's not quite that. Another definition is that it's a set of triggers that have the ability to change, adapt, and grow over time. So why do we care about any of this? Well, it's influencing our life in a myriad of ways, but it's also going to implicate equal protection and non-discrimination. Those of you who read the website will have seen we've raised that issue with regard to the way that LinkedIn runs its diversity and recruiting program, and that they are able, they don't tell us how they do it, and they don't tell us the parameters, but they are able to manipulate the pools of candidates to get what they perceive as a diverse result. And that is one example that could be potentially a model for the future. And what it means is that a lot of the quotas, a lot of the so-called equity that the Supreme Court has said is unlawful, is unconstitutional, likely violates civil rights statutes. A lot of that is going to take place behind the scenes. And that's why this is so important. You're not going to see it. If you're a candidate and you're subject to an algorithm on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever the platform happens to be, you're not going to necessarily know how your candidacy was affected by this. You will never know that maybe you weren't presented to an employer because you didn't meet the diversity criteria. You will never know why you never got the call. And similarly, if you're an employer and you're subject to this, you may not necessarily know that the candidates who are being presented to you are not necessarily the ones with the highest SAT scores or the highest engineering grades, or the highest MCATs if you're in medical schools. You won't know. So this has the possibility of really manipulating the system from every direction. And if you see, and I think Stuart might get into this more, but if you see what the current administration, the Biden administration, has been putting out, they have various initiatives for equity in algorithms and equity in artificial intelligence. And so what they're saying is that they want to see not the process. They want to see not that the process treated an individual fairly. They want group results. They want exactly what diversity, equity, and inclusion is on your typical university campus. They want quotas, basically. And that can't be achieved above the surface anymore because the Supreme Court has said it's unlawful, and that's resolved. But it will take place behind the scenes. There will be an enormous demand for quotas for the machines, whether it's algorithm, machine learning, or artificial intelligence, for those programs to manipulate the real world and manipulate candidates and manipulate employers and manipulate everything about application processes, whether it's for a permit or anything else, to achieve a desired result. So I think in many ways, a lot of the fights we've been having, while extremely, extremely important, are really just the prelude to the ultimate showdown between equity and equality, which is going to take place at a technological level. The showdown between equity and equality through algorithms, machine learning, and artificial intelligence will not be televised, so to speak. And it's something that I think we need to address. There's legislation about it, which could be extremely harmful. And I think that it's something that I'm glad we're focusing on, but I don't think the rest of the world has focused on it yet, at least not the rest of the world who agrees that equality and equal protection is the goal, not quotas and equity. So with that, I want to turn it over to Stuart, who I think has been tracking and written extensively about the pressures that are being brought to bear and how they're being brought to bear and when they're being brought to bear.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much. Yeah, that was a great introduction. And let me dig just a little deeper into how artificial intelligence algorithms are created, and that'll enable you to see why this is such an important issue for the future. The key with with machine learning and the artificial intelligence that results from it is that you can use massive amounts of information, process them through a set of prediction engines that are essentially parts of a very large computing system. And the machine is trying every time it sees the data to make a prediction about what that data is. So in one of the classic examples, a machine can be trained to tell the difference between a wolf and a dog. And it just gets millions and millions of pictures of wolves, millions of pictures of dogs. It starts to guess whether it's a wolf or a dog, and it gets the answer back. It says, you're right, you're wrong. And it tries to be right every time. It's designed so that if it gets the wrong answer, that particular line of analysis is disfavored, and it tries again. And so if you do it enough times with enough computer chips and enough data, you can find patterns in the data that is being evaluated that no human being would see. Little subtle clues that will tell you this is a dog or this is a wolf. And you only need a little bit of data from one picture, and you can make that judgment if you're properly trained artificial intelligence. It's immensely accurate. It's far more accurate than any individual human could be. That is its power, and it is why artificial intelligence is being used more and more for decisions that were previously made by bureaucracies, by human beings, trying to exercise their expert judgment. And often their expert judgment would be pretty good. But since you can use all that expert judgment and feed it into the machine to tell it whether it's right or wrong, sooner or later, it's going to learn to think like the experts and then to begin to find answers that even the experts don't see. So that is why it's immensely powerful and why we're going to see it everywhere. Every time decisions have to be made about human beings, algorithms are going to be there helping make that decision or just making that decision. So the other problem, the first problem with that is that machine learning and artificial intelligence is famously unable to tell you how it arrived at the answers it has arrived at. There is no way to unpack that and say, what's the crucial thing that makes the decision possible? The artificial intelligence has thousands of factors, billions in some cases, of parameters that it uses that play a role in the decisions that it's making. So no one of them can be pulled out and determined to be really very influential in the final answers that it provides. So that's troubling because most of us are used to the idea that if we're dealing with a decision maker, we can make some judgments about why they're doing that, or we can ask them to explain themselves, and they'd better have a good reason, particularly if they make decisions that appear to be discriminatory on their face. If they only pick white males for some particular job, you might say, hey, I want to know why you did that. And I want to see that what you're doing has a basis in reliable data. Unfortunately, the machine can't explain itself. And so we have seen really for the last 20 years, people who worry about bias, who worry about equity in particular, have said, I don't really trust these machines to make unbiased decisions. And when they ask themselves, is this machine biased? They can't really ask it to explain itself. All they can do is look at the outcomes. And so we very quickly descend into a world where people who believe in equity say, if this has a disproportionate impact on protected groups, then it must be biased. And as a routine matter now, any disparate impact by a intelligent machine is characterized in the popular press and really in academic press as a racist outcome, as a biased outcome, even though, of course, we live in a world where lots and lots of outcomes are disproportionate. There are probably a disproportionate number of motel administrators in the South who come from India. And we don't think that that industry is biased particularly, but if an artificial intelligence engine were recommending mainly Indians for those jobs, we would be encountering many people who say artificial intelligence therefore is racist. And this has forced on us the question of, what do we mean when we say a machine is biased? Do we mean that it has to be producing results that are fair to individuals, or do we mean that it has to be producing results that are fair to groups? This is, of course, as you said, the difference between equity and equality, between individual justice and group justice. And what I've discovered in looking at the literature is that while people recognize that there is a difference between those two things, as a practical matter, the academic literature defaults to group justice and to equity and to saying any machine, any algorithm that produces results that are not roughly proportionate to the representation of protected groups in the overall population is a biased algorithm, and it needs to be modified until it stops being biased. And people have come up with a mechanism for doing that. Since you can't actually figure out why these results are occurring, all you can do, and this is a routine practice now, is you go back to the training stage and you ask the machine to give you a prediction about, let's say, who's going to make the best employee at Amazon, at Amazon. And Amazon actually tried to do that, and they looked at the employees who had gotten the best evaluations and the largest number of promotions at Amazon. And they looked at their resumes and they said, we want more resumes like this. These are the successful ones. They trained the machine. They said to the machine, you find the employees whose resumes look most like this and tell us whether you think they're going to succeed. And then we can tell you whether they succeeded or not at Amazon. And that is how they trained it. What they discovered was it picked a lot of men, and a lot of Asian and white men in particular. And so Amazon just very quickly said, oh, well, we can't have that, and got rid of it, said, it must have been racist. Oh, I know why. Because the people who were promoting people at Amazon must have been reflecting an implicit bias. And so we've taught this bias to the machine. How do we fix it? We'll go back, and every time the machine tells us it's got a candidate and it says, I think this is the next best candidate to choose, we will ask, does that contribute to a disproportionate number of white males or Asian males, or does it contribute it to a more equitable, a more group justice outcome? And if it doesn't produce group justice, we're going to tell the machine it got it wrong. Even though it picked a candidate who was more likely to succeed, it did not pick a candidate who was more likely to contribute to equity and diversity in the workforce. That's a wrong answer. And we'll just keep doing that until we get a set of recommendations that fits our notion of what's a proper proportionate representation of protected groups. You'll never see that. Because these machines don't explain themselves, after they've been trained, they don't say, oh, well, I was told I couldn't do that. They just say, here are the very best candidates. And they will be the very best candidates within the constraint, sort of like Harvard. I'm sure that the students that Harvard picked were among the very best you could get, as long as you wanted a 10% representation for Black students, or 13% for Hispanic students. So within that constraint, they were very, very good. And that's exactly what you get from artificial intelligence. Very good results, subject to the constraint that it has to meet a particular quota. And I call this stealth quotas because you'll never see it. Not only will the person who is disadvantaged or advantaged by it not see it, the employer won't see it. Even the company that is selling the product may not see it, because they will have gone to a consultant and said, I would like you to evaluate my product for bias, and if you find bias, help us fix it. And that company will do the training, send it back and say, you now have a properly trained artificial intelligence model, and you should thank us because it will always pass the bias tests, which turn out to be, a quota test to see if you're producing the right numbers of people. So what I think the biggest concern I have here is that we will see the problem of bias presented to people in a context where everybody is against bias, right? The people who believe in equal protection do not want biased results, discriminatory results that treat people in a context that treat them as to be judged by their ethnicity or their race. They want something that judges people by their individual character. So they don't want bias. When they hear bias, they think that that's what is being condemned. The people who want group rights and equity are quite aware that bias is often determined just by looking at the numbers. And so what you're seeing across the country is individual states, individual cities, ethical standards being promulgated that say, above all, your artificial intelligence algorithm must not be biased. You need to get a special group of professionals to determine whether it's biased, and those professionals all have to themselves be representative of all kinds of groups and usually believers in equity. And they will evaluate this, they will fix this, and then you will have to tell us that you are not using a biased algorithm to make your decisions. And so everybody just goes out and says, I want an unbiased algorithm, and what they get are stealth quotas. And what I am trying to suggest for folks who are worried about this is the most important thing, if you're already alert to things that say we're supporting equity, we're supporting diversity, those are codes for quotas. I would say that in the area of artificial intelligence, getting the bias out, preventing bias, stopping bias, curing bias in artificial intelligence is almost always going to be code for imposing stealth quotas. And as an example of like the worst kind of thing, and to show how deeply this has already entrenched itself in the thinking of policymakers, the House of Representatives, controlled by Republicans, the House Commerce Committee, is producing a bill that almost every Republican on that committee has supported. Mostly it's about privacy. It has one section on artificial intelligence and bias, in which it says you may not process private information if it produces harm as a result. And harm is expressly defined as a disparate impact on the basis of an individual's race, color, religion, national origin, sex, or disability. Disparate impact is code for not proportional to their representation in the population, which means that they are defining harmful bias as failing to produce proportional results. This is a Republican-supported bill that is saying you may not use algorithms unless they produce stealth quotas. It's an astonishing thing. And as far as I can see, nobody in the House of Representatives has raised an objection to this. And I'm hoping and waiting for somebody to do it. For those of you at home, if you're looking this bill up, it is section 207 of the House, let's see if I got the number. I think it's HR 8152. So worth looking at. It's the leading edge of what I think will be one of the big fights of the next 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, just to jump in there, this precise wording in that is that a covered entity or service provider may not collect, process, or transfer covered data in a manner that discriminates in or otherwise makes unavailable the equal enjoyment of goods or services on the basis of race, color, religion, national origin, sex, or disability. That term, the equal enjoyment of, is essentially results driven. It's not equal access to, it's not equal access to, it's equal enjoyment of.
So they were not sure, the drafters of this, who clearly were both very ideological and very smart, was not sure. That language is, I think, drawn from past statutes. And they were a little worried that the courts might say that, no, that really does mean equal protection for individuals, not for groups. And so they added an exception that said this exception doesn't apply the standard of equal enjoyment doesn't apply if you're doing processing for the purpose of diversifying an applicant, participant, or customer pool. So if for some reason they get a judge who says, I think equal enjoyment means everybody gets equality of opportunity, they say, oh no, when we use AI, we're using it to diversify our applicant pool. So none of that equal stuff applies to us.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. So what we're going to do real quick is I have a couple questions for our panelists to give everyone who is attending time to go ahead and drop your questions in the Q&A section. And so my first question is actually for Professor Jacobson. And I know this is something we deal with in our work on the Equal Protection Project, but who gets to define what bias is for the purposes of adjusting these algorithms and AI?
Well, it might be this statute. It's probably going to be the consultant class, the same consultant class that has pushed DEI extremely deeply into education, is probably going to be the ones, the equivalent of the accreditors. So if you understand how education has been captured, it's through a series of processes, one of which is the accreditors, who gets to say, you can be a university. It's also the consultants that get hired to meet those accreditation standards. And you probably will see something similar here. And of course, we see this in the free speech realm and on campuses, not legal free speech because it doesn't apply, but things that get called hate speech. And this is not original to me. I forget who tweeted it, but it's a great tweet, is that I will agree to ban hate speech as long as I get to define what hate speech is. And so that's what you're going to have here. You're going to have consultants who will probably seamlessly shift, and maybe they probably already have, from consulting universities on diversity, equity, and inclusion, who will now be consultants to the tech industry on how to tweak these algorithms and artificial intelligence to achieve the same thing. So it's the same people who have defined what it means on campus to have equity are probably going to be the ones who define this.
Yeah, I agree. It is in that academic atmosphere, there just is no respectable argument in their view for equal protection as opposed to equity. And the professional risks of being accused of bias because you don't impose quotas are much greater than the risks of just going along and saying, I define bias by disparate impact.
And what's so frightening about this is that it will be several levels down from what is visible. It will be private consultations between the consultants and whoever's developing the technology. And all the person using the technology cares about to protect themselves is they have a certificate. Such and such institute has certified that this is bias-free, therefore you can't sue us, and that's all we really frankly care about. And so it's going to be very hard to police. It's going to be, and we see this, of course, in the education industry as well. But it's going to be taking place several levels below the surface.
I'm sorry, I had myself muted. Yeah, and I think that's what we've seen time and time again, and this issue beyond just the algorithms and AI, is that this stuff is going underground. And like Professor Jacobson mentioned, we did write about this in the various ways that we've witnessed so far. Not that it won't change, because I guarantee that it will, but the ways that we've seen this already happening. And so this next question is for Mr. Baker. Why would an institution that wants to keep using racial and gender quotas be attracted to using algorithms in general and AI in particular? It doesn't really, in some ways it doesn't make sense, in some ways it does. Do you have any insight on that?
I think it's because it's a black box. you get to say, no, we're not doing anything to discriminate against people based on race or ethnicity. We have an algorithm that is certified as not biased, and we're using it. And it just happens, we're just delighted to discover that it has produced the most balanced class in history this year. And everybody may suspect that the fix is in, and some of the differences in performance may be so gross that you can't help but notice them. But for many decisions, you can say, nobody can tell me where discrimination is occurring. This is an algorithm that has been certified and that is really, really accurate. As I said, it's going to be the most accurate form of quota that you could possibly get. And so it's very hard to attack unless you say, I want to know where it came from. And then you have to do discovery on the company that produced it. And then you have to go beyond that to say, well, who did the training and what particular training data set did they use? And was the data set artificially adjusted? One of the ways that in which quotas get introduced into algorithms is, instead of just saying you produced the wrong answer when it's the right answer, they might make up model minorities, candidates who don't exist, but who have the racial qualifications that you want, and then put them into the training data. The model trains on it, and it produces the same set of quotas that you get from training it by discouraging non-quota answers. So this is called synthetic data, and the synthetic data is another way of introducing what amount to quotas into the algorithms. So you would have to go 3-4 steps deep, and every one of those entities is going to say, why are you trying to do discovery on me? This is a great burden, and I didn't sell this product. I'm not involved in your lawsuit. I didn't choose your incoming class or your determine your promotion chances. And so at some point, people just get discouraged because they can't find the person who introduced the discrimination into the algorithm.
That's terrifying. Like, all of this is terrifying. I don't think there's any way you can be learning about this and not think that it's at least moderately terrifying. On the stealth quotas, are you seeing anything that indicates that there's a move on the local, federal level to institutionalize something like this? Yes,
there are 2 or 3 states that have pushed for this. And it's very effective and very soft. They say, well, if you're going to use artificial intelligence, you ought to assess it. You ought to make sure it's not biased. And you ought to tell us before you provide services to us or algorithms to us that you have done an assessment and what the results of the assessment are. And just by itself, the decision by a few big cities to say, we're not going to buy or use products, algorithms that aren't certified as having been debiased, creates a market for the correction of bias. And as long as that's what is setting the market, everybody is going to want to get a certificate, as Bill said, that says, I've been through debias training and my algorithm now produces a politically correct set of results. But it'll all be couched in the terms of, well, we wouldn't want to buy a product that produced biased results. So these are the standards that we've set. And around that comes a set of consultants, a set of ethical standards, all of which use soft language like bias, but which mean we want to make sure that the results that this algorithm produces are proportionate for protected groups. And if I can just scare you a little bit more, this is not just going to be used in admissions to college or in decisions about who to hire, where there have been quotas for a very long time. It is increasingly going to be used in things like the justice system or our medical system to decide who gets what kinds of drugs, who gets vaccines, who should have a priority for vaccine. And you can certainly say we would want our artificial intelligence to decide who are the people most at risk of getting COVID, and we'll get them the vaccines first. But if that algorithm has also been designed to make sure that it always produces politically correct, equitable results, it's quite possible that we will see hidden in the algorithm something that created an enormous fuss when it was done out in the open, which is something that says we're giving a priority to minorities in distributing the vaccine.
Which is something that Professor Jacobson knows quite a bit about.
Yes, I mean, New York State had such guidance. It was challenged. I was the named plaintiff in that lawsuit. Fortunately, my suit, as well as another suit, got tossed on standing. The wisdom of our courts was, well, you didn't have the disease, and therefore we don't know that you would have actually wanted this medicine. Yeah, but it's a medicine that you've got to take within 5 days of getting symptoms. So what are you going to run to court? The Supreme Court declined to take the case. It was the other case that filed a petition for certiorari. But Justices Alito and Thomas issued a statement agreeing with the court's decision not to take the case, not because we didn't have standing, but it was the crisis had come and gone.
Yep.
These medications, but said that anything that imposes racial standards with regard to distribution of medicine in the future would warrant, at least in the view of 2, and you only need 4 for the court to take it, would warrant prompt review by the court. So had they found standing, there's no doubt they would have tossed it. But that's what we're going to see. New York State Health Commissioners not going to issue guidelines.
Yeah.
They're just going to say, use this computer system.
Exactly.
How does the computer system decide? We don't know, but XYZ Institute has certified it. The American Medical Association and virtually every major medical group in the country filed amicus briefs, both in the Second Circuit, actually in the District Court, the Second Circuit, and the Supreme Court, backing the use of race for medical distribution of medicines. So the medical establishment is 100% on board with it, and they will simply have their computer people program it in next time.
And to be fair, what they will tell you when they talk about this is stories where I think most of us would say, well, that really was bias in how decisions were made, medical decisions, algorithms. It's just, they'll have the story where even people who believe in individual justice are unhappy at the outcome. And once you've accepted the idea that, well, of course we have to do something about bias, all of, the nose is under the tent, and pretty soon the whole camel's in the tent.
It's true. So I'm going to hop over to participant questions real quick, and then we're going to wrap this up by talking about what we can do. So I know what we've discussed, or what we've been discussing, is kind of frightening, but it is also our, I guess, motto, unofficial motto around here, is that we try to be realistic about what's ahead. I'm the resident optimist, so I always think that we can definitely, push for change. But we always like to talk about what we can do. I know there's a lot of questions related to that, and so we will definitely discuss that as well, because to me, that's the most important part of this, is to be informed and then know how you can take action. And there's no reason to be afraid in the sense of being like literally afraid. It's just be aware and know what we're up against and know what you can do in your own space to affect change. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But I do have someone who's dropped in an interesting thought, observation, and is asking for your thoughts, Mr. Baker and Professor Jacobson. And just suggesting, so if you don't hire the most competent people in the corporate world, your company will get worse. Also, the competent employees will go to other companies and help them. And finally, there is no diversity at the top. You have to hire the best and the brightest. So your thoughts on that and what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with companies suffering because of this is that the connection is not going to be clear. It's going to be over time and more amorphous. And as Stuart indicated, you will not know why. You will not know the thought process behind why certain people got elevated within the company or got hired in the first place. So while I think it's true that companies will suffer, and I think it's true that we will suffer as a nation if merit is not the standard, the color of your skin is the standard, or your ethnic origin is the standard for getting hired and promoted, it's just not going to be a clear connection. And so I think companies will be more concerned with avoiding lawsuits and getting their certification and avoiding the Twitter mob than they will be about performance, because it's just going to be too disconnected.
I agree. The corporate America has consistently supported quotas because it guarantees them that they're not going to be sued. And so they will file amicus briefs. And I'm sure that one of the explanations for how a Republican committee could enthusiastically embrace this is that the Fortune 500 companies they were talking to said, oh yeah, this would be great.
Yeah, and in theory, not in practice, maybe.
Right. And by the time the CEO who made the decision to do this has retired, the people who've been hired on his watch will still be in middle management, and the impact on his stock options will be zero.
Exactly. It's just beyond that, I think, is what we're looking at, a very brave new world if things don't change. Probably by the time my kids are old enough, I think the world will be a very, very, very different place. I'm not convinced in positive ways either. So kind of shifting gears a little bit and talking about what we can do. There's a lot of concern about the fact that so much of this is being done in ways that we can't see, in ways that are almost undetectable to the public. Let's just take the university and higher education issues, for example. What in the world can we do about that? You know, if these things are in place, how would we know about it, and what can we do to push back against this?
Let me try an idea. This is an idea that I will freely admit is only 3/4 finished. But the same phenomenon that produced this pressure to build quotas in so that you could claim that you were bias-free can be brought to bear on the practice of building quotas in if states like Florida and Texas start saying, hey, if you're going to sell us artificial intelligence, we want you to certify that at no stage in the development of this artificial intelligence algorithm were protected classifications used to adjust the outcome, to train the data, to produce an outcome other than the one that would otherwise have been produced by the data that we actually want measured. I say it's only, I think that as a strategy, insisting that people tell you that there was no discrimination in the construction and training of the algorithm, that is going to reach into the kinds of behavior we've been talking about. My reason for being unsure about exactly how to make this work is defining exactly what we mean by we don't want you to do essentially a racial quota operation or an insertion of political correct proportionate results into the normal workings of an accurate artificial intelligence training model. How to exactly frame that is going to turn out to be partly a technical and partly a legal issue. But I think we all know what we're talking about. We want the algorithm to tell us whether it's a wolf or a dog without having to believe that it has to produce 40% dogs in the answer. If it doesn't have a quota for dogs, it's going to be more accurate than if it does. And that's what we should be defining as bias, and what states that believe in equal protection rather than equity should be finding a way to use their procurement power to affect the market.
Yeah, I think a couple of sentences or a paragraph inserted into this House bill
Yep.
to that effect could probably go a very long way. I think there's also an opportunity for various states to do with this problem what they have done with regard to critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion, to use their market power to say, you can do in Illinois whatever you want. We can't stop you, but you're not going to do it in Florida or, Idaho or Texas. And companies will respond to that. I think that if you were to require some senior official of the appropriate company, and I'm not sure if it's the company that produced the algorithm or whatever it is, that, to sign under penalty of perjury, that this product has not used race and other factors to alter the results of its program. I think, I'm not saying it's going to stop this in its tracks, it's not, but that would go a long way. So I think that if there's anybody here, who knows people either in their state houses or the federal, in Congress, really the House, to alert them to this problem, I think that would be a good first step, because my guess is people are going to say, what are you talking about? And if they understand it, they will understand that all of the achievements they have accomplished at the state level and at the US Supreme Court level could be done away with the click of a button. I think there is a political answer to this, not a complete answer, but at least a partial answer.
And it will force, if you make those certifications go back through the entire supply chain of developing and training and then commercializing the algorithm, it will be an enormously educational experience for everybody to see the kinds of problems that come out of the woodwork that right now we just aren't being told about.
Completely agree. So we have a couple questions about how this might be used in elections. And I think that's a very interesting topic. Mr. Baker, do you have anything you'd like to discuss there?
Under no circumstances would I want artificial intelligence black boxes near my election. Elections should be as close to Luddite as we can make them. And we've actually made a lot of progress. All the idea that we should have a computer to record our votes, that is so discredited at this point that very few states are doing that. The other risks for artificial intelligence, yes, it will be used to identify all of us and to decide what messages will be most effective in getting us to vote which way. I predict that this will take the kind of micro advertising down to an even more individualized level, so that anything that might induce you to, against your better judgment, vote for the party of the other party will be, a candidate for the other party will be something that that candidate is beaming to you and only to you.
Professor Jacobson, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that we don't want any of this stuff anywhere near the counting of elections, but I don't think we can stop it from being used in terms of targeting and micro-targeting and messaging. And I'm not sure that's bad, okay, to send message, identify people who might agree with you and want to vote for your candidate. I'm not sure that's a bad thing, but it should be no place near the Board of Elections.
I do worry that it can be, and probably is, being used for things like if you're Amazon, you know what the buying habits of every one of your customers are. And you probably know when they are least likely to be price sensitive, usually 10:30 at night on Saturday. And so you're pumping particularly sexy products at 10:30 at night at a high price. I think there will be political analogs to that. So we may not be completely comfortable with the results of this, but I agree with Bill. We're not going to be able to stop it. It's going to be part of advertising everywhere.
Well, I mean, it's already everywhere, because I can tell y'all just anecdotally, on any given day, I'm solicited with 2 to 3 different AI plugins, use
Yep.
AI for this, use AI for that. Every single tech, everything is utilizing some version of this. I haven't touched any of it because I tend to be very old school. I still take notes with a notepad and a pen because I just don't trust technology. That's just me. But I mean, it's there, it's inescapable, right? So and there's a couple questions about FOIA requests and whether or not it would be possible to FOIA these algorithms, particularly if they are being used by a government or publicly funded entity.
My guess is you would have to have a very lengthy court fight to get that. Most statutes, and I'm not remembering the precise carve outs for these things, but are not going to require, first of all, FOIA requests are only to the government. Okay. Right. You can't FOIA a private company. You can't FOIA the consultant. You could FOIA the communications between the government and the consultant, but you're going to get a lot of blacked out pages where they will claim under some exemption or another that they can't give you the secret formula to Coca-Cola. Okay.
Yeah, I think trade secrets would do the job.
Yes,
proprietary information. And as I said at the outset, even if you have the entire thing in your hands and you can look all through it, you can't tell how it's achieving the results it achieves. That's just, people have trouble believing this, and I have trouble believing it, but it is true. It's just too complicated.
Okay, so I think last question to both of y'all, and then we can do just final thoughts before we wrap up for the evening. What should people be doing to oppose the algorithmic counting by race? Are there any, I know we've talked a little bit about laws in some red states, but is there anything that should be happening in blue states, whether that's to counterbalance what's happening there? But just any thoughts you have on what the layman can do to push back against some of this?
So my rule of thumb when I see a proposal for regulating artificial intelligence is I hit Control F and I type in bias, and I go straight to the discussion of bias to see whether it talks about disparate impacts or talks about it in a way that is consistent with what I've been calling stealth quotas. And if it does, then you have to ask, well, what's the impact of this? And it's important to speak out to say, I need to know what kind of bias you're talking about. Are you talking about protecting individual rights and individual opportunity, or are you talking about group rights and group opportunity? And until that's clear, we can't just say, oh yeah, we're against bias.
Yeah, I think things that individuals can do is, one, call attention to this problem and contact, decision makers. This will be posted on our website. It usually takes 3 to 5 days. So by the end of the week, this will be on our website. Send it to them. Find out what they're doing to prevent the manipulation that's the Supreme Court has said is illegal, done through technological means. And they'll say, what are you talking about? Well, go watch this. Or send them Stewart's article about stealth quotas. Anything, but be people who call attention to the problem, I think, is things that individuals can do for now.
I completely agree. And so with that, closing thoughts, we'll start with Mr. Baker.
Yeah, this is not a fight that we are doomed to lose. Even academics are a little uneasy at the idea of imposing strict racial and ethnic and gender and sexual preference quotas on the outcomes of everything that is touched by AI, because AI is going to touch everything. And I can certainly find academic discussions in which they say, well, bias could be about group rights. It could be about individual rights. You have to decide what you think is improper bias. So people are uneasy about this. You just need to press them into understanding what it is that they are actually proposing and make them own up to it. And in many cases, they will say, yeah, I didn't mean that, and I don't mean that, and I don't want that outcome. And then you just have to start tracking through what people are actually doing. I mean, as Bill said, the red states are in a position not only to pull this data out and bring it into the light, but to say, if somebody uses an algorithm that has been already racially gerrymandered, you can sue them for racial discrimination because they've imposed a quota on the particular product or service that is being run by the algorithm. And I think it will only take a little bit of that pressure for people to realize that they're not solving their liability problem by adopting these stealth quotas. They're just creating a different kind of liability problem.
So I thank everybody for coming. Again, thanks to Kimberly for hosting this, and Stuart for taking up his time and educating me on all of this, because
And me.
it's not something I'd really thought much about until the last couple of months. And I think it's probably early enough. The Biden administration is now just coming out with more what I would call thought pieces, as opposed to proposed legislation or executive orders. So while this could be a devastating blow, it can also, I do agree with Stuart, a few pressure points. The key is going to be to find what is the pressure point. And I like that idea, and I agree it needs to be thought through what specific language would be used. But you not only, you have to certify that there were no alterations made on the basis of race, sex, whatever. I think if you do those things, and so it's not enough just to have a certification. This institute has to also certify to that.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you put individuals on the line, whoever's signing it, I think you could slow this down, but it's something we need to get attention to. The people in the House committee considering this need to be contacted. Okay. And they need to watch this video and read. And they need to understand that what they're proposing could have very disastrous implications. So I thank everybody.
Yes, and I want to thank Mr. Baker. Thank you again for your time and sharing your expertise. And Professor Jacobson, as always, thank you for sharing your knowledge and your ideas with everybody. And I want to thank all of you for joining us as well. This is being recorded. We will publish it when it is ready for publication. Since you registered for this event, you'll receive a copy or you'll receive the video to the email address you used to register. You'll also find it on the Legal Insurrection blog soon. And just as my parting thoughts is something I always like to share too, is that, as I mentioned before, we bring these things to your awareness so that you are aware and you know what you can do to mobilize not only yourself, but your community, your sphere of influence, and to encourage you not to wait on someone else to do that for you, but to encourage you to do that yourself. And so there's no reason to be afraid of these things. We just have to know what we're dealing with, and we have to move accordingly. And know that you're not alone either. I know it feels that way. Sometimes I think the opposition does that intentionally, but you are not alone. We have a whole group of people here. We are on top of things as we can be, and we do what we can to ensure that you have the information that you need to do what you can do on your end, but that's where it falls on you to actually do something. So again, thank you everyone for participating, for joining. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you on our next live event. Thank you. Good night.